Today we're looking at the Pioneer DJ DJM-S5 Serato scratch mixer. This is a new mixer for 2022 from Pioneer DJ, and it's aimed at hobby DJs. It's aimed at people who want a mixer to use, typically with DVS, with control vinyl, using Serato software, but want something that looks and feels pretty similar to the kinds of mixers that more pro, semi-pro and fully professional scratch DJs use. Like this is the DJM-S5, the replacement for the S9, and there's also the even bigger and more expensive S11. So if you've been kind of eyeing those mixers with envy and wishing you could own one, now you've got a chance to own something that's similar. So we've had it in the studio for a little while. I've had a play with it. I understand what this is all about, and in the next few minutes I can give you a good idea as to whether this is for you. So the first thing you notice about this is this bright red paint job. This is the only one you get. There's no variations of this. So it's going to stand out. You're going to either love or hate that. It also has a nice transparent window on the front, which I think you're just going to love, which shows you the workings of the Magvel Fader Pro, which is the same fader that you find on the more expensive mixers. So you are getting that feel of a more expensive mixer there. And this is for adjusting the feel of the crossfader to make it loose or more with more tension in it, and the up faders are set the way they're set. What we have on the top of the mixer then is again very familiar. If you're used to the way these mixers are laid out, you've got your low, mid and highs here, and then the trim and the filters off to the side. The filter is hardware, it's built into the unit, so you can use it just with plain normal records or CDs, even without the software plugged in. But when you do plug this in, it unlocks the Serato software. So you download Serato DJ Pro and this will unlock it. You don't need to spend any more money on it. However, if you want some of the bells and whistles, you will be paying extra to get those, as is the way Serato is sold nowadays. So I'm not going to go through every function of this, basically because we've covered them all multiple times. Just go and look, for instance, at our S7 and S11 reviews if you want to see how all the pads work with Serato. I'm going to tell you the differences, and then we're also going to have a look at the new features on here that you don't get on anything else. So, you know, one of the big differences, and you can see it already, is this has just got less on it. You've only got 4 pads here instead of the 8 you get on the other ones, and they're kind of clicky pads. So they're not the same as the kind of more MPC style pads you get on the other ones. They're good, they work, they do the job, but they're not as expensive feeling as the ones on the higher models. And round the back, again, it's a case of we've got fewer things going on here. But that said, everything that is here is professional enough. We've got our XLR outputs and our booth output, which is balanced. And then inputs are very limited. You get 2 sets of RCAs, which you can switch between line and phono, and the earth pin, of course, there. 1 auxiliary input, 1 microphone input, and the auxiliary and microphone inputs have very simple controls down at the front of the mixer to blend them in, but there's nothing else going on there with those. And so it's got the stuff that you expect, but as I say, kind of less of it. So the things that are worth pointing out on this are the new features. For one of them is for supposedly teaching you to scratch, and one of them is it's just a cool feature. So I'm going to show you them both now. The first one then is called the scratch cutter. So scratch cutter is, so if I was to grab a sound on this deck, okay, so this is a sound that I might want to teach myself to scratch with, right? And I want to teach myself to scratch this in, crossfader off, back, crossfader on, in, crossfader off, back. Okay, that is something that takes a lot of practice. And so they've introduced something called Scratch Cutter on here, which will do the crossfader bit for you. So by holding down, for instance, cut 1 here, it goes into this mode here. And now I can grab a sound and I can turn this on. So at the moment, I'm not doing the crossfader bit. I'm not going forward, crossfader, back, crossfader off. I'm not doing this. I'm just doing it with my hand. But if I turn this on, you can hear it's emulating that crossfader function for me there. That's the most simple of the patterns it's got. There are actually 6, and they get up to pretty impressive transformer scratch and different types of patterns, and you just access them by pressing all 6 of these. The idea of this is it gives you the chance to hear what it would sound like and get your get your deck hand doing the movements, getting the timing right before having to learn the crossfader. One of the things we teach in our scratch courses, you've got to teach your hands separately. I can see some scratch DJs liking that, or some beginner scratch DJs liking that. I can see non-scratch DJs just using it because they can't be bothered figuring out the crossfader stuff. Like the jog cutter on the Flex 6, it's a bit gimmicky for me, but I see what they're trying to do. It does work, it is there, so if it's something for you, it's worth having. I'm not sure you'd buy the mixer for it, but it's there, and I've given you a little demo of it now. So the second thing that they've added to this, which I think is actually more useful, is something called the Crossfader Hot Cue. So this is actually quite nice. So the way this works is you engage it by holding down Shift and pressing that button there. And once it's engaged and you're playing a track, let's go over to this deck this time. What it's doing in the software is jumping back to the hot cue that I was set at. And that's actually quite nice. That's actually something I can see being quite useful, because you can set a hot cue, you can engage that, and then you can stutter it in. You could do it on vocals, or you could do it just like there. I was doing there, just emulating the rhythm of the track and then letting the track go. And you can't really do that with the hot cue buttons, because the track will start playing, and on DVS, if the track stopped, then the hot cue button won't do anything. So it's nice to have that there as a way of stuttering in from a hot cue on any part of a track that you choose, and you can set the hot cue you want. One other thing that's new though, and you might have noticed this when I showed you the back of the mixer, is that it's got these USB inputs. So, I mean, you can see this as a cost-cutting measure, because you've got to provide the power adapter and you've got to put a USB-C cable to power the unit. It doesn't seem to affect the audio quality. It's loud, it's bright. I've got no issues with the audio coming out of this thing, as is one of the things you might worry about, and the LEDs and so on all seem bright enough from it. There's two of them. There's one of them that you can plug in your computer, which is what I've got, and the computer is actually powering the mixer at the moment. But the other one is also if you want to add external power as well in order to power this thing up. And I think you could get away with powering it from a power bank. Now, Pioneer DJ don't endorse that, but as long as your power bank's good enough, which means you could, in theory, take this mixer and use it somewhere where you haven't got any mains power or power coming from a computer that you don't want to kind of like run down. So you could have a power bank and get all your gear going somewhere away from the mains there. So interesting, I think, is the answer to the question, why have they done that and is it worth knowing about? I wouldn't buy the mixer because it's got USB-C power, but I tell you what, I think we're going to see quite a lot more of it. Right, so that's the overview of the mixer. What do we think of it? Well, it does a lot less than something like this, but what it does well. It's really nicely built. It's a nice piece. You know, the red, I like the red. I like the transparent thing at the front. As an item, it's something that I think you'd probably enjoy owning. The 4 buttons at the top is probably the thing that is the most limiting. It is fiddly using this pad button here to switch between the functions. And a lot of the other functions that you see hardware for, like for instance crossfader reverse and changing the crossfader curve and switching sample banks and stuff, is all done on the shift and holding down other buttons. So you would have to learn a little bit about the way this works to kind of get around some of the things that they haven't put hardware functions on there for. The clickiness of the buttons, some people might not like that. It didn't really bother me, to be honest. I found the scratch function, the scratch learning function, to be a bit gimmicky, but I did like the crossfader hot cue. I thought that was a nice addition, and I can see myself using that if DJing with DVS, wanting that kind of stutter on my cues, because again, it's not easy to get that when you're using DVS. We really need to look at the competition here. What would you be buying instead of this? I think the one that springs to mind is the Numark Scratch, because the Numark Scratch, just like this one here, has got the 4 pads in the middle, and it's a kind of smaller mixer as well, but it doesn't do as much as this. You can't have the pads set, for instance, to separate functions as you can on here, but in the same way as this is a software mixer, right? You haven't got any effects on here apart from the filters, all the effects that you can dial in as Serato's effects. The Numark Scratch is the same in that respect. It's very cut down. So I would look at the Numark Scratch against this. It doesn't do as much, but this costs half as much again. And then also the other mix I would look at is the DJM-S5. Yes, it costs a substantial amount more, but it does a substantial amount more as well. And if you think you're going to miss having the full-size pads, having 8 of them, and a lot of the other functions on here, much easier auto looping, more versatile effects and so on, then it could be worth just saving a little bit extra to get this one. But for what it does well. This is the DJM-S5, brand new for Serato DJ from Pioneer DJ. It's a nice little piece, and for some people it's going to be exactly what they want. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of this. There's a full review written up over on the Digital DJ Tips website, but meanwhile from me, Phil, here in the studio, get good, get out there, make the moments, and we'll see you very soon.